Professor Richard Wolff goes over the rather shocking history of labor in the United States, particularly the last 40 years of it. It's fascinating. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a reminder, tomorrow afternoon, 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, I will be at Town Hall Seattle, not physically in person. We're doing it virtually, but it's off their website. And there's a link over at thomhartmann.com. I will be doing a book reading, signing, riffing, ranting, whatever you want to call it, about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, with a foreword by Ralph Nader, who called it the best book on the topic written in a generation. And he has written books on the topic, so that's pretty high praise. So anyhow, that's going on tomorrow. You can check it all out at thomhartmann.com. On the line with us right now, speaking of economics, is Professor Richard Wolff, the co-founder of Democracy at Work, the author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff with 2fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. And Professor Wolff, I was hoping, as we head in toward Labor Day here, that you could give us an overview of the nature and relationship of the relationship and the nature of that relationship between labor and capital and government and business and all these different dimensions that we call the economy, from the point of view of labor, from the founding of our republic till today. No small assignment here, sir.
All right. Let me try in the short time that we have. If we go back to before the Europeans came to our continent here, we had very interesting systems of economics that the Native Americans had developed. They were collective or communal in most cases, whole tribes managing to work out as a community who would do what kind of work, how the work was divided up. Then they would meet as a whole and decide through debate and discussion how to divide up the produce. Sometimes that function was given to a council of elders or chiefs and so forth and so on. But a very different economic system existed here for centuries very successfully. The Europeans arrived with a completely different economic system, namely modern capitalism by and large. And we know what they did to the Native Americans. They didn't just get rid of their economic system. They mostly got rid of them physically by slaughtering them, a kind of an early example of ethnic cleansing. The Europeans who came here set up multiple systems, small-scale individual farming, the famous New England examples, without employer-employee relationships, without capitalism. Everybody was their own employer as an individual. But that gave way pretty quickly, despite Mr. Thomas Jefferson's effort to keep it going. And we had finally the system by the end of the 18th century pretty well established, employer-employee, not in the South. In the South, we had a different system, of course, slavery, master and slave. In the North, employer-employee. Civil War ended the slavery, destroyed it, and replaced it with the same employer-employee. And that's been our basic capitalist structure ever since. A very small minority of the population have the wealth to be the employer, and the vast majority of us are employees. From around 1800 to around 1970, a remarkable story. This capitalist employer-employee system was able to raise the wages of workers every decade for 150 to 170 years. No capitalism was as successful as the American. It raised the standard of living of workers. They had to, of course, fight for this with trade unions and strikes. But they were able, because the capitalism was reasonably successful, to get at least enough of it for them to have rising wages. All of that stopped in 1970. What came together in the 1970s was the following. Three things. Number one, the export of jobs to the rest of the world. Precisely because wages had gone up in this country, capitalists decided to move production to where wages had not gone up, where they had gone down in many cases, China, India, Brazil, all of that. Number two, in the 1970s, an enormous influx of automation. The computer replaced the worker. And number three, immigrants coming into the United States offering to work for lower wages. End result, jobs disappeared, wages stopped rising. The last 50 years of our history is a time when workers are ever more productive, producing more and more for the employer, but the wages the employer gives the workers have gone nowhere. If you adjust for prices, the average real wage of an American worker today is about what it was in the late 1970s. A staggering impact on the American people because they had gotten used to the idea of rising wages, rising well-being of each generation. And so they were caught losing what they had come to assume was the American dream. They went to work and did more work than everybody else. They borrowed more money than any working class had ever had until they couldn't borrow anymore and they couldn't work anymore. And that's the crash of 2008. And we're still living in an economic system that no longer functions. Only it took us 50 years or more to come to the realization that this system is now good only for the few at the top and has finally shown its true colors, which is a system that works for the minority who are in the position of employer and not for the majority who are the positions of employees.
Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you. So it sounds like, given that the whole tale goes south, at least for the American worker in the 70s and early 80s, that and sort of coincides with the Reagan Revolution and it was the Thatcher Revolution in 78, this whole kind of neoliberal revolt, and Jimmy Carter had bought into it during the last 2 years of his presidency. Is it possible to have a capitalist system that doesn't ultimately get corrupted, that can, keep some guardrails in place and protect workers? A, and B, and we have about a minute and 3/4. And B, is it possible if we were to set up an alternative system, say a system where corporations are not owned by stockholders, but they're owned by their employees, is it possible to prevent a system like that from being similarly corrupted?
Well, I think the answers to both of them in the short is yes. I think in the 1930s we had the New Deal, which was an attempt to have the government step in and change the rules of the game, not in a fundamental way. The New Deal left the employer-employee relationship the same, but it encrusted it with all kinds of rules and regulations that made it a lot less unfriendly to the mass of people. But the lesson is, if you don't get rid of the employer-employee relationship, even when you make a victory like the New Deal, it can then be taken away from you, which is what the last 30 or 40 years have done with Reagan, Thatcher, and all the rest, right up to and including Mr. Trump. So I think the lesson is you have to do the second thing you mentioned. You really have to end the employer-employee relationship. Stop this set of systems, slavery with the master-slave, feudalism with the lord and serf, and now capitalism with the employer and the employee. Those systems end up working for the minorities who control them, and therefore we have to make the break and reorganize our production system so it's a real democratic community that organizes and works in each enterprise, makes its decisions democratically. That's the only way to break the habit that has cost us so dearly in not having made that kind of change sooner.